morning and welcome. My name is Ritwij, and today we are discussing one of the defining policy challenges of our time: how governments can ensure energy security in an increasingly unstable geopolitical environment while staying on course to meet their climate goals. Recent events have served as a reminder that energy security remains deeply intertwined with geopolitics. Around 20 million barrels of oil and a significant share of global LNG trade pass through the Strait of Hormuz each day, highlighting how disruptions in a single region can cause global economic consequences. For policymakers, this raises a fundamental question. When energy security and climate objectives appear to collide, how should governments respond? Should they prioritize expanding fossil fuel production to reduce immediate vulnerabilities or accelerate the transition to clean energy? To help us unpack these questions, I'm delighted to be joined by Molly Walton, Director of Energy at the We Mean Business Coalition, where she leads the organization's energy strategy and energy transition team. Before joining the coalition, Molly was an energy analyst at the International Energy Agency, contributing to the World Energy Outlook and co-leading the agency's flagship work on energy access. Molly, thank you for your time and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. Happy to talk about one of my favorite topics, energy security. So I'm sure we'll have a great conversation today.
Thank you. I would like to begin the conversation by asking that, first of all, what do you guys do at Coalition?
It's a very important question. Who are we? Who is the We Mean Business Coalition? So, for those who may not know us, we are a nonprofit coalition who unites the business voice on climate and accelerating the energy transition, really with that objective of securing prosperity for all. So, we were founded by seven nonprofits. See if I can get them all. BSR, CDP, Series, Climate Group, Corporate Leaders Group, the B Team, and WBCSD. We were founded before the Paris Agreement, really to bring the voice of business into those important climate conversations, those international conversations, and we've continued to evolve. And we work with this core group of our seven core partners, but then beyond that, we work with a wide group of companies. So we've got 23,000 companies who are in our network that we engage with, and we have over 100 strategic and implementation partners that we work with. So a big part of what we do is really aligning and collaborating across the ecosystem, working with partners, working with policymakers, really to build that world in which people and businesses are thriving from clean economies. And we just launched a major new program. It's called Electric Advantage. So this is a 4-year program really focused on accelerating the transition to clean electrified economies. Very timely topic for today and for the conversation. And this is really focused on how do we spur industry action? How do we reform regulations? How do we drive investment into electrification? It really embodies a lot of what We Mean Business does, which is really showcasing what businesses are doing, bringing their voice to advocate for the policies that they need, spurring governments to set policies that create higher ambition and drive things faster. So we work quite a bit at that intersection of business and policy. So happy to, again, very good topic for us and happy to dig into this.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So, coming to our first question, and which is around Strait of Hormuz, the topic which has been in discussions for months now. So, the Strait of Hormuz handles roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply, and every time tensions flare, we are reminded how exposed the global energy system remains. From a policy perspective, what lessons should government be drawing from this moment about energy security?
Yeah, so I think as you said, we are in our second major global energy crisis in 4 years. Let that sink in, right? It used to be that these were spaced out a little bit more, but now we're seeing them come in rapid succession. And obviously, that has implications in terms of how we're viewing and thinking about energy security. And I would say that governments and businesses are reacting differently this time than what we've seen in the past. I think we're seeing a deepening and a widening understanding of what energy security is or it should be. I think one that's moving away from just thinking about it in terms of supply and replacing lost supply, but to really thinking about demand as a really critical lever and core component of ensuring energy security. And I think this is really critical, right? We're seeing how we've typically seen this played out, and we can use Russia in legal invasion of Ukraine as an example, is there's been a strong focus on scaling renewables or diversifying the source of oil and gas, right? In the case of the EU, many people argue that maybe they traded one dependency for another when they shifted off Russian LNG, but then turned to the US. But I would say this time it's different, as I said. So I really think that we're seeing electrification be put front and center, in my view, rightly so, as that critical lever for delivering energy security. And I think this is essential, right? You can change your source of LNG, you can change your source of oil. It's really important that clean domestic electricity generation, that's absolutely essential. But maybe slightly controversially, renewables are only going to get us so far, right? Unless we cascade that clean power throughout our economies and really change demand, unless we electrify our homes, our transport, our industry, we're not going to achieve that energy security. We're not going to achieve those competitiveness benefits, the affordability that comes with it, the productivity that comes with it, unless we really get that electrification piece right. And so I think it's really important. And maybe just to give one stat for, I love data, being an energy nerd, formerly from the International Energy Agency. But I think there was a really good stat just to give some sense of the magnitude of what we're looking at. So the EU spent more money in the first 60 days on fossil fuel imports and the volatility of fossil fuels than the US spent on the Iran war, right? That is a significant implication. That money can be much better spent at home shoring up security than having to import volatile fossil fuels. And we see that there's some analysis. I think it was Strategic Perspectives that did some analysis that showed that if you were to electrify half of the EU economy and pair that with a rapid rollout of renewables, you could reduce your fossil fuel imports by 2/3 by 2040. So that's saving sort of imports, but it's also saving money, which is really important. And so I think you're kind of seeing this aha moment, right? This kind of moment of clarity, certainly in the EU and around the globe, and that intense focus on electrification across its suite of policy packages at the moment. We're awaiting the electrification action plan, but you're really seeing it come through in how they're starting to talk about what they want their central economic and security strategy to be. It's really centered on electrification, clean electrification. I think that's an important point. And you also see it in terms of how others are acting. France, they announced plans for a roadmap to transition away from fossil fuels and an electrification action plan, right? Recognizing that those two things go hand in hand. And I know I'm talking a lot about the EU. It is obviously not just the EU who's looking at the energy security situation that we're in and thinking through how to respond. We're seeing Indonesia, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Chile, they're all promoting the switch quite heavily from combustion, so your typical gas guzzling vehicles, towards electric vehicles. We're seeing India is promoting a switch to electric cook stoves, recognizing some of the challenges with LPG. And we're really seeing efficiency, right? Electrification is efficiency, right? It is 2 to 3 times more efficient than the combustion of fossil fuels. But we cannot forget energy efficiency. It is a critical piece in this, and we are seeing a strong response from governments. I think the IEA in their policy tracker identified, I think it's 20 countries that have already announced new policies on energy efficiency following the Iran crisis. And then, we can't forget, just at Bonn this week, the COP31 presidency announced a 35 by 35 electrification target as part of the action agenda. So this is trying to achieve 35% electricity in total final consumption by 2035. This is in line with what analysis from the IEA has said is needed to get us on that trajectory for net zero. It is an ambitious target. It is fantastic to see. So I really think what you're seeing is a convergence and an understanding that the more that businesses and the economy run on electricity, the less that each shock is going to hit. And so for me, I think absolutely the security calculus is changing, and I think it's a good thing and a needed thing. The question that comes for me now is how quickly can Europe and other countries really take advantage of what we're saying, of the electric advantage, right? How do we leverage the electric advantage to bring us into more secure, competitive, and affordable economies?
Yeah, coming to the angle of renewables, so there's been a long-standing debate about whether geopolitical shocks accelerate the energy transition or just slow it down. And some experts argue that crisis push countries towards renewables and greater energy independence, while others says that they trigger a return to fossil fuel security. So, what does the evidence tell us exactly, and what does data tells us on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as I said at the top, there's been multiple different energy crises, always sort of centered around oil and gas. Interesting. And I think each crisis has resulted in slightly different shifts in the energy system. So if we go back to the 70s, right, the oil crisis of the oil shocks of the 70s, we really saw that countries were responding by investing in more nuclear. There was a big push on energy efficiency. We saw that countries were pushing for international cooperation on stockpiling oil, right? That's where the International Energy Agency really was born out of that response. But other conflicts that have maybe been shorter time frames, maybe they've lasted for 6 months, like the Persian Gulf War in 1991, we saw oil prices rise for about 6 months, but we didn't necessarily see it dramatically remake things. So I do think there's something about the continuity of how long the pain lasts, but I also think it's the frequency of it, right? Obviously, we're coming off the back of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That had a significant impact on gas. The IEA, the latest data I saw, that is Europe's gas consumption is about 16% lower than it was before Russia began the war. So you're seeing the impact there. And for all of these reasons, I do think that this time is different. I do think we are going to see a bigger transformation and not necessarily a retreat back into the old system. And I think that for a couple of reasons. The first is that this is really an oil and gas crisis, right? It's both of these fuels at the same time, which is really impacting countries wide and far. I think, second, as I mentioned earlier, there is a little bit of this fresh and top of mind memory of the what happened with Gaza because of the Russia war. And third, I think we have a lot more options and lower cost options than we've had before, and maybe just some data to back that up. So I think first and foremost, one of the stats that is most telling for me is that we 75% of our existing fossil fuel demand we can replace with technologies we already have. So it's not a question of, oh, we need to find the technologies. We already have the technologies needed to get rid of 75% of our existing fossil fuel demand. I think the other thing is let's follow the money, right? We have consistently seen over the last several years that more money is being invested in clean energy than fossil fuels. 2 to 1, right? And the latest IEA analysis just confirmed that. That is not a one-off trend. That is something that we have been seeing year on year. More money is going towards a clean economy. So there, people are betting on that's the direction of travel that we're going, and that's what's going to make us more secure.
Yeah.
I think the other piece of that, we've seen 91% of new renewable projects are cheaper than fossil fuels. The cost of batteries are coming down significantly, and renewables are available everywhere, right? So this is sort of an equity and the ability to tap into some of that. China is electrifying 9 times faster. And interestingly, India is right on its heels, right? Ember did some really interesting analysis that showed India is actually electrifying faster than China. And we always think of China as this electric state and really leading on electrification. But India is electrifying faster than China did at the same points of development. And so I think India is going to be a really interesting country to watch in terms of how electrification really drives and transforms the economy. And finally, I would say, well, maybe not finally, but I want to go through the different sectors. So, EVs, right? I think we hear quite a lot in media, especially in the UK, in other words, of kind of, oh, EVs, they're not doing as well, sales are down. And I think that's just really a false narrative. IA showed that a quarter of new sales in 2025 were electric, and I think that's actually accelerated. The Iran war has accelerated this. So the latest data I saw was March in 2026. 30 countries saw record-breaking monthly sales. And if you look further, 60 countries recorded year-on-year sales growth. So we're really seeing a strong reaction to Iran come through in terms of EV sales. And even before this, I think we were seeing strong pressure on fossil fuel demand, real evidence that it is being displaced by these clean technologies. Oil is maybe one of the best examples, right? EVs have already displaced 1.3 million barrels a day of oil. That's anticipated to go up to 5 million barrels. Now, that analysis by 2030, that analysis was done before the current crisis. So I would actually be really keen to see, with the new deployments of EVs and sales picking up, that's probably an even higher number. And transport demand, oil is 50% in transport. Road transport is 50% of oil demand. So as that starts to get eroded, that's not necessarily coming back. We did some analysis with the Energy Transition Commission and Ember and E3G, and it really showed that you're going to lose a significant part of that. And petrochemicals demand is going to rise, but it's not going to offset. So you're losing a large, chunky part of your oil demand in the system. And I think finally, the other point, bringing it to business, since that's who we work with, that's our constituency. Um, we did some polling last year. So we polled 1,500 business executives across 15 countries on their views of renewable electricity and what government should be prioritizing. And what we really saw, that 90% said that access to renewable electricity was vital when they were considering making investments. So they wanted to know the availability, and that was a core part that went into their investment decisions. And I think even more tellingly, 50% said that they would consider moving their supply chains or their operations to countries who did have a majority-based renewables electricity system. So that becomes a very strong economic case, that becomes a competitiveness issue, that businesses really see this as central to their strategy, and they're willing to change locations to make sure that they secure it. So for all of those reasons, and that was a lot, but I love to give data points across because I think it's important to get a holistic sense across the system. That's why I do think we are in a different moment and we are going to see an acceleration. It doesn't mean that it won't be without some of the challenges, and especially on the policy front. But I do think that we are not necessarily going to lean back into that old fossil system in the way that maybe we have in the past.
Yeah, you talked about businesses now coming to governments. So, energy policy is often shaped by immediate crises rather than long-term strategy. Do you agree to this? First, and if you could redesign how governments approach energy planning, what would you change to better align energy security and climate objectives?
Oh gosh, it's a really great question. I would say that we're starting to see some of it. So it's redefining energy security as resilience, not just a supply issue. And as I said earlier, really recognizing that demand remains the sort of critical weak spot, and we really need to address demand. We can build, as I said, we can build all the renewables we want in the world. If we're not transforming that power, we are not transforming economies, and we're not securing economies in the way that we can and we should. And so I'm really pleased to see such an intense focus on electrification. I think that's absolutely critical. That's what's going to transform things. I think the reality is that our systems are still very much built for fossil fuels. They very much prioritize fossil fuels. And so I think there's a couple of things that would love to see in pairing on this is incentives and subsidies, right? This is one of the biggest opportunities for governments is to change where incentives and subsidies go. Fossil fuels are widely subsidized, and I think there's an opportunity to redirect that money towards electrification, towards renewables, towards investment in grids, really making sure that that money is being put towards driving the clean energy transition. I think we also need to address the high cost of electricity. Renewables are very cheap. People are not seeing that translate into their bills, right? And that's largely because of the way that we've designed electricity markets. It's because we have distorted price signals. And I think that's a really critical piece that we need to get right. We also have a lot of punitive taxes and levies that are put on electricity and not fossil fuels. Just as one example, there are places in Europe where electricity is taxed 14 times more than gas. And so I think we're seeing, and also in many markets, right, gas is setting the price. And so these things together, we really need to think through, well, how do we actually change it? Because it's not that electricity is more expensive, it's because of the way that we've designed that system. And so I think that's really important to look at it. And so I guess when it comes down to it, right, you're asking about what would I want to do different if I was in charge of the world, which I like that question. I think it's really planning energy systems as systems. I think too often we look at things very much sector by sector, power, transport, industry, buildings. We really need to look at it in a holistic way. And I think that's also what's been holding back electrification too, as a side note. I think we've looked at it, okay, how do we advance EVs? How do we sort of replace out fossil fuel processes in industry? But we really need to center electrification as that holistic economic security and competitiveness strategy. And we need to do our planning with that in mind as well. There's a lot of value that can be derived from better integration and thinking about it as a system. And the last piece that I would say, and is really critical, is we need greater certainty, right? We need to look and build policies and our responses beyond the election cycles. This is really important. This uncertainty, this going back and forth on policies, they're changing every time someone comes in office, is a really big limitation to business, right? Political headwinds, changing start stop, it makes them hard, makes it very hard for businesses to plan. Makes it very hard for them to do that long-term investment in planning, and that really increases the cost of capital and it really slows deployment. So I think that's another core piece that I would add into what could be done differently and better in response to this crisis.
Yeah, and how can businesses play a role in help shape all of these transitions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of different ways, and actually, one of the biggest ways is to keep making the investments and to share what they're doing. So I have a lot of really good examples from businesses in terms of the investments that they're making. So, for example, and some of this is why it also just makes me really optimistic for where we're going. There's a really cool example of a Swedish company called Saltex and Holcim. They are producing, so it's going to get a little nerdy, but they're producing clinker, right? So this is a key binding ingredient for cement. And they are, for the first time, using a fully electrified process to produce this, which is fantastic. That's really essential and really transformative. I think you're also seeing Fortescue, another really great example is of a mining Australian mining company. They are very big champions for the transition away from fossil fuels for electrification. They are rolling out electric trucks, electric haul trucks for their mining operations. And what they shared with us is that you can save, or that they will save over $400 million a year in diesel costs from doing this. So that's very transformative. I think another great example is Inca Group, right? They're looking at how do they install more efficient energy efficient cooling and heating processes across their operations. And so you've got these. So I think there's a couple of things. Businesses are taking these actions, they're making these investments. And then I think the other piece of it is advocating for the policies that they need to go further and farther. And this is something that we really do a lot. We really bring that business voice into the policy conversation. Businesses can say, hey, we're making these investments. We want to go further and faster, but we need these policies. We need you to be more ambitious in your policies. And what we've seen from our experience is that then gives policymakers confidence that they, yes, okay, I can put in more ambitious policies because the businesses are going to support that and they want this. And so I think there's a really important feedback loop. We call it the ambition loop here at We Mean Business, of businesses taking action, setting ambition, advocating for the policies they want, and government seeing that and doing the same. So you create sort of this elevated ambition and accelerate the transition through that way. So I think that's a really important piece of what businesses can be doing.
Yeah. And finally, I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that what gives you the greatest confidence that the global energy transition will continue to accelerate if it gives? And what are the biggest risks that could still derail the progress in an increasingly uncertain geopolitical environment?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with maybe the pessimism because I want to end with optimism. So I think what keeps me up at night is um, disinformation, right? As we just talked through, there's so much good stuff that's going on within the energy transition, and everywhere I look, I see amazing data points. That doesn't always come through, and I think some of that is a very coordinated disinformation campaign from a certain strong fossil fuel lobby. Who's really pushing back and saying this isn't possible, this isn't affordable, it isn't feasible, we don't have the technologies. And I think that is fundamentally false and something that does need to be pushed back on more. And it does make me concerned because that is often a message that people hear and they get worried, right? What is this going to mean for me? I think the other piece that is essential if we are going to really do this, we have to tackle affordability. And that is a core. We will not, it is doable, but I think it is a core message. And I think it's something that we need to be honest with. I think it's something that we need to focus on. We need to make the transition accessible. We need to recognize that some of these technologies do have higher upfront costs. Again, a lot of that is linked back to because their fossil fuel counterparts are unfairly subsidized. But we do need to deal with some of the short-term affordability questions. How do we support people and businesses and economies to take up some of these technologies and make sure that we have a level playing field? And then also going back to what I said, how do we make sure that electricity is fairly priced? Because right now, as I said, it's often more expensive. And so people look and say, well, why would I electrify? It's just going to cost me more money. And it shouldn't be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that's something I think is really critical. What gives me hope, and I'm going to actually cite some breaking analysis that we've done. We mean business with E3G and the Global Renewables Alliance. So we did some polling. So this was a follow-up to polling that we did last year that I cited earlier. We polled 1,800 business executives across 18 countries, both emerging economies and developed economies, really on how they were viewing the electrification, the benefits, the opportunities. And this was done during the period where the Iran crisis was starting. And maybe just to give you some data, because to me, this gives me a lot of hope. I think what we see strongly from those results is that businesses are not reacting to the current crisis by demanding more fossil fuels. That is not how they're reacting. They are demanding faster electrification and stronger electricity systems, right? So 91% of businesses that we polled say electrification is going to improve energy security. 91% are linking that so concretely. 79% say geopolitical instability has made electrification more urgent, right? It's not only that they want it now. They want to accelerate the transition to clean electrified economies. 78% say countries who use electric systems would be better protected from shortages and price shocks, right? So they're saying this is the answer and the solution to what we're seeing come out of the Hormuz Strait. And 76% said their businesses would be protected. So it's not just their governments. They also see benefits to their business and protections to their business. And fundamentally, these businesses, they want electrification, but they also want clean electrification. And so 82% of these businesses say that they want their country to be powered mainly by renewables. And so I think this is something, this, in addition to all the really great examples that I already gave, and I've got tons more, we could do just a whole podcast on really amazing things that businesses are doing, is what gives me confidence that we are on that path towards clean electrified economies. And we're really going to be able to leverage the electric advantage. So we've got more competitive, more secure, more productive, more affordable economies that really benefit everyone who's in those economies. So that's what I would say. A little bit of optimism, maybe to close here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly, for your insights and for your time and for the great work which you are doing and your organization is doing as well. Thanks so much for your time again.
Thanks for having us. It's been great to speak with you.